I don't know. I wasn't really paying
Now you don't have to get such a close-up.
We're on camera.
All right, I would like to sit by Lois.
Oh, well, how about that? Now we're just, we've got, would you like to
We're always tight as kids, too.
That's right.
You are different. I was legit.
Yeah, but,
You can stand us here while you're welcome to sit
And before we do another thing, I want to thank you all for coming, but I want to thank Ruth and Bonnie, who really led the charge on this. And so please, Ruth and Bonnie, stand up and let us give you a hand. Before they started this activity, they didn't even know how to use the telephone. Dean, would you ask a blessing for us, please?
Kind of thought that might be happening. It's a little bit disappointing to me that I'm the only ordained Wolbrink. I see some others out there that could qualify with a little extra effort. So 3 years from now, somebody else will do this, right? God, should we turn to God with prayer? God, our Heavenly Father, we thank you for bringing us together as a family, that you have given us each other with your gracious love, that we can share life together share faith together, faith in you, that you have brought each one of us on such wonderful journeys, that our lives have gone in many different directions, in many different parts of the country and the world. And yet together we experience your love and a knowledge and understanding of faith that you lead each step of our walk. Help us to share that faith tonight. Our walk in life, where we have come from and where we see you leading us as we are living together at this time. May that bless our spirits as the food blesses our bodies. In Jesus' name, amen.
Thank you. Just to give you a little idea of the evening, we're going to have a cafeteria-style dinner, of course, and after we get started and after everybody is seated again with their plates, we'll go through an introduction so that everyone here has a chance to be introduced, and we may talk about why that's necessary if you don't already know. And after that, we'll have some reminiscings from the uncles and aunts. And after that, the cousins will share their interests and hobbies. So now it's time to start eating. And would you rather have order or would you rather just have chaos? Why don't we just go have chaos? Which table wants to be first? Oh, okay, we'll start from my left to right. And to all of you over there, my apologies.
Brother and Harold had lunch together at Omaha Airport and thought it would be a good idea. And I was appointed to put it together.
Well, great. It was a good idea, and it's been going on, and I think it's great. I love it. I enjoy it. So if we could start with Uncle Richard's family, first of all. And if you would say your name and where you live.
I'm Alan, and I live in Atlanta, Georgia.
Thank you.
And I'm Lois, and I live in Connecticut, right on the New York State border.
Thank you. Now Uncle Charles's family.
I'm Joyce Van Gorp, and I live in Orange City, Iowa, with my husband, Bill Van Gorp.
Francis.
I'm Frances Gorp, and I live right here in Stickney.
I'm Wolbrink. Live with my wife for about 10 miles out here.
Great. And the next one is, of course, my dad's family, Uncle William, to the rest of you, I guess. And I'm David, and we live in Milwaukee area, and this is my wife, Rosemary. Memory's the second thing to go.
I'm Ruth, and we live in Spencer, Iowa, and this is my husband, Don. Do you want all of these
Go
now?
right down, go right down to it. Right.
Okay, don't age them.
Oh, okay. My name's Ron Denode. Bruce oldest son, and this is my wife Julie, and we live in Rochester, Minnesota.
We're missing Ivan in between, but I'm Lynn, and my husband Mark, our oldest son Corey, which is 4, and Jordan, which is 1, and we live in Frost, Minnesota, which is you're heading down I-90 here, you hit Blue Earth, and Frost is about the size of Stickney.
I'm over here. I'm Cheryl, And this is my husband Justin. We're in Des Moines, and Autumn is playing in the corner. She's about 15 months. You can't see her at all.
Just sit down. Yes, I'm next. I'm Adrian. My wife's Fran, and we're in Mason City, Iowa. And two of our three boys are here.
I'm Mike, and I live in Bloomington, Minnesota.
I'm Daniel, and I'm currently not only unemployed, but can't even say I live in any place for more than a month.
Alex is in it.
Daniel, that's a tradition, because when we moved from Westfield, North Dakota to Edgerton, Minnesota, not only did your dad offer to carry the steps, but he also told a serviceman along the way that we lived nowhere.
Nobody knows me. Good. My wife Candy and I live in Venice, Florida. And we have 2 extra bedrooms if you're ever coming through Florida and you want shark's feet. And I have some family here. Let's see, age, right? Brought Candy's brother along, John Dalrymple, and his wife Annette, and son Matt living in Minneapolis. And I'll let the daughter take care of the rest.
I have an older brother, his name is Jeff, and he lives in Portsmouth, Virginia, and he couldn't come today, so we've been taking lots of pictures to share. And my name is Rhonda, and I live in Suffolk, Virginia, and this is my husband, Tom, in Drusick, and he's from, yes, tomorrow's our 1st year anniversary.
All right. The next is Uncle Garrett's family.
I'm Carrie Brewster. Arlene was the oldest. And this is my wife Lisa, and this is Carissa.
Well, we're especially glad that you're here. That's nice. That's great.
I'm Scott, and my dad was Roger Wolbrink, and I live in Sioux Falls. And this is my girlfriend Doris.
Great.
Yeah. I'm Troy, and I live in Orlando, Florida. Oh, and I'm married to Candy.
I'm Pat, and this is my husband Jim, and we live in Sioux Falls.
Yes.
I'm Steve, and this is my wife Diana, and we live about 3 miles from the corn palace.
The world's only corn.
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
And I'm Deb. This is my husband John. We live between Mitchell and Mount Vernon. Not very far.
Does that take care of Uncle Garrett's family? Next would be Uncle John's family. Right?
I'm Marie, and your Aunt Marie, and John's wife. And these are my kids here, so they better introduce themselves. I'm Irene. My husband Matt, we live in Springfield.
I'm Mary. This is my husband Jenny, Egbert, and we live in Portsmouth.
I'm Harlan, my wife Bonnie. We live about 12 miles on the home farm, on what was Dad's home place out in Douglas County.
Just barely.
Right.
I forgot to say I live in Corsica.
All right. The next family would be Nellie's family.
I'm Harold, the oldest. This is my wife Carol. And this is where the first family that the name changed from Wolbrink to Dykstra.
Well, everyone has a slip now and then.
You won't hold that against me.
You don't know where he lives. Oh, we live, oh, that's the problem. We live home.
I'm Sarah Beanstra, this is my wife Sam.
Family. Now, in between would be Mary Ann, and I am Dorothy Lund. Lived in Portland for many, many years and just moved across the river over into Washington. And the next would be Harriet and Darlene, and I know they would have loved to have been here also.
The next would be then Uncle Gideon's family.
I'm Paul, and I live in Spring Lake, Michigan, and I regrettably am the sole representative, as far as cousins are concerned, of Uncle Gideon's family, but we'll try to remedy that in the future, perhaps in '02 when the cousins gather again. And my mother, of course, Jane.
Well, we're glad that you're here. Isn't it amazing how far so many people, the total mileage, if you total it all up, this is really an exciting get-together. Aunt Katie's family, I believe Aunt is...
I'm Katie Dyksong, probably the second one to slip up. Anyway, I'm from Harrison. That's been the family special place, you know, from the beginning. So I'm keeping up the tradition there.
Very good. Aunt Sarah's family.
Guess you all know me. I'm Sarah. This is my husband Orville. And we live just southwest of Stickney, or maybe 9 miles. I'm next to the youngest of the living children, Jacob Wolbrink.
Yeah, Daryl, and wait for Jesus. We must live 10 miles because we're just a mile beyond the folks.
And I'm next in line, Merlin DeBoer, and my wife Lorraine, and we live on the west side of Sioux Falls, South Dakota.
Where's that from the Corn Palace?
East of there.
I'm Bonnie Vanderleiden. This is my husband Larry. Our address is Corsica, but we live in New Holland Lake, or right by New Holland Lake, about 10 miles west of Corsica.
And then Uncle Junior's family.
I'm Dwayne. Oh, I should let Dad go first. I got here before he did, so I Anyway, I'll finish. This is my wife Ruth, and we live on the old farm stand.
Seems that in order to fill us to get up, I have to introduce myself. Yeah, I'm one of the oldest ones here. They call me Junior.
I'll introduce my mother since he forgot. I'm Phyllis. I'm the middle of the kids. And this is my husband, Steve Pennings. And we live on
John, Nellie, and Richard's place out by Aurora Center.
They always say they save the best for last. I'm Karen. I'm the young. That's right. I'm the youngest junior now. This is my husband, Marlon Moss. And we must live 9.5 miles from here. We're halfway between Orville and Darrell.
Pretty good neighborhood.
Did we forget anyone? We forgot some of our names. We forgot this. We forgot that. We forgot some of our wives. At least we didn't forget any kids at the park this year. We're improving. Bonnie has a fine excuse. Is there anyone here who has more than 6 kids? So what are you laughing about?
That isn't the first time that happened.
Is everyone finished eating? They would like to pick up the dishes, and rather than take all the time it takes to go up and down the aisles with the cart and everything, do you think it would work while we're sort of getting reorganized?
So it's like $70 million a year, and we give back to different communities all over. Got a whole division. That's all they do. They just look for places to get money.
But it really worked well to pass those dishes down. That saved a lot of time. While we're getting reorganized, let me apologize for not bringing an updated genealogy, the updated genealogy book pages. I didn't get that done. After the program's all over, we've done all the important things. If you want to hear all my excuses, come and see me. Meanwhile, the easy way to collect information would be to write it on a piece of paper tonight. All children that are less than 3 years old, the chart on the wall is 1996, and that's where it stands today, and I've got a lot of work to do to get that done. I need your help. First name, middle name, date of birth of all children born since then, new spouses where there have been marriages, information like you know would go in there. Feed it to me, and you can also send it to me at home, that's fine, but if you can get it there tonight, get it over with, be good. I have 1 pen, I'm sure there are other people who have more. The feature of our program tonight is reminiscences by 2 aunts and an uncle. So without further ado, they've already introduced themselves. Tell us some stories. Yeah.
Okay.
All 3 of you can share the front, but I thought you'd have to do it with 1 mic. Merlin brought 2. That's great. We want to thank Merlin for not only the video that's going to be on Channel 6 tomorrow at 2 p.m., but we also want to thank Merlin for the sound system. Isn't that great?
I just want to say that now since Junior is here, then I won't have to do much, because he's experienced at this.
He has the best memory. My memory is not very good.
Well, I suppose most of our stories are kind of, you know, about tough time stories. And yeah, they ask what your favorite hobby is or something like that. And mine, I got a lot of hobbies, but somebody put down Studebaker, and that's one of them. But I like to tell stories. And I got to tell about, and then it's their turn. But I got to tell about one time, and that was in the dirty 30s, like we called them, and Pa and I came to town to get a load of coal. And that was one thing. I guess we grew up with that, but Pa always had time for a cup of coffee, and we went and had a cup of coffee at the cafe and sat at the counter, and there were other fellows there. And a lot of them complained quite a little, and it was cold, and yeah, the editor of the local paper came in, and he was complaining. Now, he didn't do as good as Mary and Denny. I never hear them complain, but he said his building was so cold, and he just couldn't hardly afford to heat it. And then one of the neighbors said, well, he said, I'd sure like to have your paper, but he said, I just don't have the money. Well, the editor said, I tell you, if you bring me a load of cobs, I'll give you a year's subscription to my paper. No, said that farmer, he said, I haven't had a corn crop for years. He said, I don't have any cobs. But he said, if I did have cobs, he said, I wouldn't need your paper.
I thought I'd tell a story about going to church on Sunday. And it's maybe not the best, but it's something that I still remember real good. You know, we lived 7 miles from church, and it was all dirt and gravel. And if it rained really hard, why, we couldn't go to church because then the road would be too muddy. But when it was dry, that road was terrible dusty. And if you got behind a car, well, it wasn't very pleasant, especially if it was hot, because then you had to have your windows turned down. And I can remember one Sunday we got behind a car. It was DeVries's. I'll just say Albert DeVries's. They didn't have quite as good a car as we did. And one of the boys was driving, and Pa usually sat with the boys in front, and he would give the orders. And he said, let's just pass them. And the first thing you did when you passed, you honked the horn. And something that's never done anymore, but I think when you honk your horn, that meant for them to get over so that you could get around them. And what we didn't know was that when we passed them, they followed us really close. And when we walked into church, here were DeVries's walking in about the same time as us. And Mrs. DeVries said, see, we're here just as quick as you folks. And it wasn't in a very friendly voice. I don't know how much we heard of the sermon that night. But there were more unpleasant things about riding to church in those days, because the boys always sat in front, and the girls and Ma always sat in back. And they'd turn the windows down, and then our hair would get all mussed up. They heard plenty. where they had to turn up their windows. But it wasn't always wind, but it was grasshoppers too. Because they would come through the front window, and then occasionally you would have one under your dress when you were sitting in church. So there were pleasant times, but some that weren't just really pleasant either.
I'd like to tell one of in church. No, I really wasn't aware of this until I married Charlie, and he said he was always jealous of us because if a baby cried, which would be Junior, I suppose, mostly since and then there were about 3 or 4 would follow the one out who was going out with the baby. So of course we were anxious to have that baby cry. But that wasn't the only thing. This was in the summertime. We had a canteen in the car, but I guess we drank it empty. Anyway, here went Gideon with that canteen around the front of the church, and the door was open of the church because it was hot. And he went walking gently past that door with that canteen a-rattling. And of course, everybody in the church could see this. Well, anyway, he got just the water, and we were having a pretty good time in the car. But then this is one on Nellie. Pa was in the consistory so much, and they sat separate in front of the church in the corner there. But anyway, a few of us would have to sit with Pa because there was too many for Ma to watch, you know. So Nellie put a few playthings in the pockets of his suit coat, so she was prepared. She could play with those in church.
We did have a little bit of warning on this, and this isn't really reminiscing, but I was home longer than anybody else, and I heard stories, a little more of the pioneer stories, more from the Wolbrink side, from Pa's side, and incidentally, you don't call your dad Pa anymore, but we were not allowed to call him Dad. He was to be called Pa. And I think at that time was when Dad was a slang word, and he didn't, he was honored to be called Pa, but not Dad. But anyway, I wanted to talk about Ma's side. I know more about Pa's side because he told more stories. But I think maybe the Brower side, which is from the mother's side, I think that was kind of a colorful history too. They came from Pa's side, our grandparents came to America growing up. They were growing up. But from Ma's side, that was about a generation earlier. And they came over on the sailboat. And I know one of the things they told about that was coming over on the sailboat. For one thing, it was a long journey. And you had to take your own food along. So you had to dry, you couldn't take anything moist, but you would dry bread and things like that, so it wouldn't mold. And then it was, I don't know how long it was, but it was almost months to cross that Atlantic. And then they came to Pella about the time when that was kind of the front as they moved westward, and they lived there a few years. And then a wagon train, and they were in that, went from Pella to Sioux County. I mean, that was around 75, I think, 1875. And then the grasshoppers moved into Sioux Center. And those of you who lived the 30s in South Dakota knew what grasshoppers would do, but they will migrate. They will get in the air currents, and those grasshoppers moved into Iowa, and every year when the crop was about ready, they would take the crop, and they just weren't making it there. All they had to eat was cornbread. So they decided to go back to Pella again. But then an uncle came. Yeah, I don't know. Of course, it took a few years from the front to move west to get this far after Sioux County. And I'm not up on dates. I don't remember. Maybe I've heard, but I don't know just how long it was. But then an uncle of my grandmother, a brother of my grandmother, an uncle of my mother, came to South Dakota to homestead. And meantime, the Browers, they had always lived by Pella. And I think Dave knows more about it than I do, but it's hilly at Pella. And they lived in the hills there, kind of in the river bottom, and they had a flood. And 2 children in the family died. And I don't know, Sarah and Kate, you maybe know, what age were they about? I think around 12 years old. Now, one had to be a little younger than the other. But anyway, they wanted to get out of there. They wanted to. 2 children, it flooded, and the wells were polluted. And 2 children died of diphtheria about the same time. And they had a chance. That uncle lived 2 miles west of Harrison. And he agreed to let them move on their homestead. So they came to South Dakota. Now, the Browers were not as aggressive as they could have been. There's more people that came to South Dakota, but I've heard pioneers talk about it. It didn't pay to come with covered wagon, because the railroad was trying to fill this community. They built the track out here, and it wouldn't do any good, a railroad track, without people living here. And the railroad rate was very reasonable. But anyway, the Browers came with covered wagon from Pella, which was about a 400-mile journey. And the horses they had pulled loads in the hills there at Pella. And between the 2 of them, they only had 1 eye. Now, I've checked that out with a veterinary, and he said that was possible when a horse would overexert themselves, pulling those loads in the hills, and horses would overexert themselves, and the tendons would break to the eye. That they came with they only had 1 eye between the 2 of them. And I don't know, what else do we add to the story? Anyway, they settled.
Something about Grandma staying
Yeah. It was, of course, a big trip, and winter set in, so that they had relatives in Iowa, and then Grandma and the younger children, where Ma was one of them, and they stayed in Iowa until Grandpa and the brothers got to South Dakota, and I guess then they came by train. And I thought maybe that was worth filling you in on that.
Do you remember them?
No, I never knew a grandparent. I was one of those tail enders, and our grandparents. There was only one of them that made 70. Had 4 grandparents. The other 3 died in their 60s. So I never knew grandparents.
I didn't either. They were gone before I was born.
Okay, Sarah didn't either.
Grandma Wolbrink died a week or 2 before Sarah was born. But I remember a little bit. I was about 3 when she was. And I remember Ma would teach Sunday school between babies. She did. Well, anyway, then Pa and I would ride with Uncle John Wolbrink. and his, it was 2 people in the front and 1 in the back, and I don't know just what. But anyway, I remember going to Grandma's house there in Harrison, and I always got a piece of gum.
Anything else, Sarah? I don't know that. I suppose I could tell the car story. But anyway, we talked a little about the 7-passenger. That was the car Pa talked about the most. I don't know just why, but it was the first one with a self-starter and electric lights, and so 1918 model, I guess. And he had had it happen one time. No, I think it was Garrett who had it. Garrett was the driver. I'm sure it was. But anyway, yeah, terrible muddy road, a low spot. They had to take a run for it. And before they hit it, then that oil line that goes to the oil gauge broke or came loose, or I don't know. But it started spraying oil on Garrett, and it got him, you know, right under his face. And he couldn't do anything about it, because if he stopped, he'd be stuck. So he had to keep going till he was through the mud hole.
Well, mentioning Garrett, we had the first glass enclosed car, I guess that's what you call it. It was a Lexington. It was not a new one. It was but anyway, we were going to church and Garrett was driving, and I don't know, that car was difficult. Anyway, going that one corner, we got in the ditch before we, but I think we got out. But that car was something else. We always went the back way to church, where the horse barn was, because if we went in front of church, it would always shimmy. So Pa says we were going to go the back way.
Well, I can tell another 7-passenger story. That 7-passenger was about new, and I'm sure Katie and Sarah know this story too. And a mile west from us, Joe Sepma lived there. And his wife was a terrible obese lady. She was really big, and she was in childbirth. And Doc Buchelman couldn't handle it, and I guess the car must have been about new. And I think Doc Buchelman only had the way they told, I think he only had a coupe, a 1-seated car. So they asked Pa to. She had to go to the hospital, and he had had a kind of a, he had had a bad trip, because Doc Buchelman was telling him to step on it all the way, and there weren't graded roads in that time. It was more following wagon trails. But he said when they got there, Doc Buchelman, he flipped the cover open on his watch and he said, we made that in an hour. And that was pretty good for those days. Mitchell was 40 miles. They cut across a little more, so it might have been a few miles less. But they had made a trip in an hour, 40 miles.
I know a little bit more about that 7-passenger, because I had special seats.
Yeah. I said we talked about it, and I didn't bring one. I forgot about it. I got one yet. But,
you got one of the seats? Well, I remember those were seats you pulled
you
under.
You know them better than I do. You're older.
I never got to sit in them. There were little seats they could pull out from the back, wasn't it? 2 extra seats. And I remember how the boys always fought about sitting on those 2 seats then, going to church. And it was a curtain car, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And so you sat out in the open, and there was the front seat, and then 2 boys sitting in between the front and the back seat on those little seats. A little different
Well, I faintly remember them, but I don't remember much. But about those, they called them jump seats. And cars were narrow in those days. That they had to make them a little longer. But anyway, it had 2 of those jump seats, which otherwise it was a 5-passenger. But if you had them, you had a 7. And they folded under the back seat, I think, and then you would pull them out, and they would be above the knees of the back seat passenger, so you sat up high. And that was a nice seat for kids. But I faintly remember them, not much.
Maybe you've told that one about it before, but when you and Grandpa and a bunch of boys went there by Wheeler, and you didn't know dare to ride in that car because of that, to me, is a scary thing.
When the bridge was built there, then Pa was, he liked to go for rides, just like the Wolbrinks all did. So they went to check that out, the new bridge. And if you ever go there, that same road is still there. Pa said that's the same road yet, and it's the same. They haven't changed it since. But there is a long hill there, and that 7-passenger only had rear wheel brakes and wheels about that high, and they didn't hardly dare to take that 7-passenger down that hill.
What bridge is this?
What?
What bridge? I don't know if everybody caught where it's at. What bridge?
Okay, it only had 2 wheel brakes, only in the back, no front wheel brakes.
The bridge.
Oh, the bridge, yeah. South of Platte, yeah. The bridge south of Platte, and it isn't there anymore, but the Wheeler site is there and the road is there yet.
Was it called the Wheeler Bridge?
They called it the Wheeler Bridge. And there's a fishing area there now, South Wheeler, if you ever get to Platte. And it's still that same road. And the family got out of the car, and Pa and Richard took the car down. Of course, getting the family out of the car, you got rid of that extra weight, and now uphill, Pa said uphill that was no problem, because he said the only hill a Studebaker can't climb is one that leans backwards.
Now, if you come to Harrison tomorrow, you know there's a big lake there and that grade there. And years ago, when we would go over that, and Pa would say, "Now nobody talk." That had to be really quiet because there was water on both sides, and it wasn't a very wide road.
And it was dirt. It wasn't.
No, it wasn't.
It wasn't graveled, so of course it got a little slick, and it wouldn't be good to slide in a ditch.
What about that school story in the attic?
In the attic.
In the attic.
Oh, Junior can tell that. You'd have heard that one before.
Today.
Okay, our school was a mile east of Aurora Center. And there was a time when, I don't know, were our older brothers the only ones in that school? They probably kept the school open. Through the school with a wooden floor, of course. There was a trap door to the attic too, and one day when the teacher wasn't there, they got the bright idea to check out that attic. And they had a couple chairs, I guess. I don't know just what they had to put on the teacher's desk, and they could get into the attic. And the teacher got back to school, and I guess she knew where they were. But she didn't say a thing. She straightened things out, put her desk in place, and straightened things out. And she didn't say a thing. She just went about things as usual. And they were getting terribly bored up there. And And maybe John was there too, but anyway, William was the one they designated. He had to drop down in the attic and hang on his hands, and he hollered for help. And yeah, the teacher helped him down. She helped him all down. But then she never said a word. They just went on and had school as usual, and they never had gone up there again either. Is that enough, they say?
Did they go to school in the buggy?
Katie can tell that one. That was kind of before my day.
Well, by that time it was the 5 boys, and Nellie could go to school too. And they went with the buggy. Well, anyway, this one time on the way home, something hit the horse in the back of the, and that horse went on a runaway. So the boys all jumped out, and here Nellie stayed with it.
I think those stories are just great. Those stories are the core of our heritage. And no wonder the world looks so glum. No, no, it's a precious thing, and I probably shouldn't joke about it, but that is our heritage. And I just think that our family, like any family, the more of that stuff that can be recorded, whether it be written or tape or whatever, I think it's just great. We invited everybody to bring show and tell about their outside interests, their hobbies, what they do in their spare time, whatever that is. And we were concerned about this group because they were kind of shy and might not want to take any time to talk. So we do have a little icebreaker. Sam and Sarah have agreed to do a little skit for us. Now, before they start, I want to tell you that they said that they had no hobbies. So that, what are they going to do? And they spend all their time farming, and that, I guess, is their hobby. But at any rate, as an icebreaker, I asked them to do this first, and so let's give them a hand as they do the skit.
You're kind of late with dinner today, aren't you, dear?
Don't think I don't realize that. How about a cup of decaffeinated coffee while you wait? You see, when I picked eggs this morning, the door of the chicken coop latched shut on me.
So what happened?
Well, I couldn't figure out how to open it up again.
You just pull the latch up, you know, the little thing on the side.
Yeah, I know now. I had a lot of time to try and figure it out. How come you didn't come to help after all the calling? Boy, that latch is sure nothing like the doorknob I had in the city. How did your morning go?
Well, a couple little calves are scouring.
Scouring?
Yes. I wanted you to call the vet, but you weren't anywhere around.
Scouring.
Yes, where were you?
Well, I suppose I was locked in the chicken coop. I spent a good part of my morning there. Scouring?
Yes, scouring. Well, I finally took my boots off, came in and called the vet myself. He'll be here sometime soon.
Scouring must be a bad thing for calves to do, right?
Of course.
Your brother called this morning. He asked how the field work was coming. He said his straw was almost ready to mow.
He said what?
He said the straw was about ready to mow.
Never mind, honey. Why would he say that? We just planted the oats a month ago. Why would he want to mow them now?
He didn't say anything about the oats. He said the straw was almost ready to mow.
Are you sure he didn't say the hay was ready to mow?
Oh, well, maybe he did. Is there a difference?
Yes, dear. There is a difference. Were there any other calls?
Yes. A man from the sale barn called and wanted to know if you had any springing heifers.
Did you tell him I have a couple to bring down?
No. I looked out the window into the field and I didn't see any heifers springing around. So I told him you must be all out of springs right now. By the way, you never showed me any springs. How in the world do you get them on heifers anyway?
Sweetie, he meant a cow about ready to have her first calf. I'll call him after dinner.
Oh. Well, how did your plowing go?
The plowing. The plow wouldn't scour this morning for some reason.
Oh, good. I'm so glad something went well for you.
I said the plow wouldn't scour.
But when you said the calves did scour, that was bad. So I figured that with the plow...
Don't worry, hon. You'll learn the term farming terminology soon. Just remember, you want a plow to scour, but you don't want the calves to scour.
Well, at least you did something wrong this morning.
Probably so, but what exactly do you mean?
Oh, I don't know, but before you went out this morning, you said you felt guilty about the pigs having their babies.
No, my little city wife. I said I had to check the gilts because they are going to have their babies. The gilt is a pig who is going to become a mama for the first time.
Oh, I wish I were back in the city where doors have knobs and not funny floppy giddy gadgets. And some dumb chickens don't peck you when you take an egg from a carton, and where people talk right and don't say things with such strange meanings.
Oh, it's okay, honey. By the way, there is one really good thing that happened this morning. We have another cow out there that has just been decaffeinated.
See, I had other things on my mind a while ago.
By the way, if anyone has any questions afterwards and want a little lesson on this scouring thing, I have a feeling there's a few in our audience that don't know what that is. And yeah, and there's one thing yet I'd like to share. Yesterday, Harold and Carol come over to our place, and last night we got to celebrate their 36th wedding anniversary with them. And I asked Harold, I said, now, you've been married for 36 years. I said, what do you think? Is Carol just as beautiful today as she was 36 years ago when you married her? And he looked at me and he said, yeah, but it just takes a little bit longer now. So it takes her a little bit longer now.
Yesterday.
I'm told it was Sam and Sarah's anniversary yesterday too. How many years?
34.
34, all right. Well, they're gone. Merlin, I goofed up the program to a certain extent. Aunt Lorraine has something that validates what Uncle Junior said about the Browers in the Pella area. And Merlin, does she help setting that up, or who's in charge of the projector for Aunt Lorraine's map?
Marla? Professor at Central College, J.D. Hatter. She really was writing just about the Des Moines River Valley, but she was telling about the beginning and the endings of many of the towns that had started, in the early days. And on one of the pages, there was a plat of the just west of Pella area in Marion County. And one of the little plots of land near the city of Red Rock has T. Brower on it. And I thought you might be interested just to see that, to know it. I was quite excited about it when I saw it. Right up here on the side. The name on the piece is T. Brower, so that must be where where Ma's folks lived and where she was born. I know a few times Gideon and I would drive out. He wanted to see that river bottom country. Not that he knew exactly where they had lived, but just to see it, and absorb the feel of ancestors, something like that. Well, I just thought you might be interested in seeing that too. Yes. Right. Yeah.
And that probably was the river bottom where they had was it diphtheria or something, and where the horses had to pull so hard that they were injured. So it's, again, part of that heritage. Thanks a lot. That's great. I wish someone was writing this all down, and all of this information could be shared. I would like to call for a volunteer to do that. It's kind of maybe a little bit unfair. I should have thought of it earlier, but if someone thinks they can write what's happening, these stories, things that are happening tonight, do it. It's time now for us to share our personal interests, and I called for introductions by age, by the oldest family first. But I would rather have volunteers now, so who would volunteer to be first? Now, we had an icebreaker. That was supposed to make you volunteer.
Did a whole table over here because we had things we wanted to share. We were kind of excited about that opportunity to come, and so I'm only going to talk for about half an hour. And one of the things that I've enjoyed doing the last several years is speaking to different kinds of groups. And I had done some reports for a club, and then somebody had heard that and said, well, come talk to our group. And then another group said, well, somebody said from somebody, that you do this, can you come and share? And soon I was doing quite a bit of mother-daughter banquets, conventions, ladies groups, women's clubs, and one fellow happened to be in a group and he said, I'd even listen to you if you talked about linoleum. So that made me feel kind of good. But right now I spend some time I have a talk on old tin cookie cutters, and some of you have seen those up here, and I talk about the history of that, and you know that the word cookie wasn't a part of our speech until 1796. And that's about the time, well, another 3 years, George Washington was going to die. but it was the early part of our country, and that comes from a Dutch word sounding like cookie. And so 1796 was when we first started using the word cookie. And then I talk about the cook stove, and I talk about the fellas who made the tin and made the cookie cutters, and they had such a bad reputation they wouldn't even let those tinsmith guys stay in the hotels. Because the jokes about traveling salesmen probably started with them. They would cheat the farmers and bother their daughters. And so one of my talks then is about the old tin cookie cutters. And so that's a fun one to do. And it all started with this one, which was a heart. And then pretty soon I started looking for other cutters. And by the time you have 3, it's a collection. And then it just went from there. So I've really enjoyed those. And so they're up here for you to look at. I have a special one up here. This was in a shop by our place, and I thought it was real cute. It's got a stamp design, and it's got the fluted edge. American homemakers love the fluted edge, and it was just neat. But they wanted $4 for it. This was several years ago, and I said, that's too much. So I was complaining at dinner one night about this neat cookie cutter, but it was $4, so I wasn't going to buy it. Well, a few days later, I changed my mind, went back to buy it, and it was gone. That's what happens with antiques, you know. You got to buy it when you see it. Christmas came, there was a shotgun box under the Christmas tree for me. This was in it. My oldest son, Michael, had gone and bought it himself. One of the other stories or other talks I give is about the history of the folk art, or the history of the heart, the development of that as a folk art symbol, I guess. And it goes back to Egyptian coffins, 1400 BC, about the time of Moses. And it took about 2,000 years for that shape to get to Europe. Then it belonged to the church, and they were the only ones that used the heart shape. But then it got into the secular world by 1300. It was on playing cards, but and when they appeared in France, and each symbol, hearts, clubs, diamonds, and spades, all stood for a part of French society. The heart stood for the ecclesiastical hierarchy, or the church. So hearts on cards, that's where that symbol comes from the French, from the 1300s, and it stood for all the church people, the higher-ups in the church. The Northern Europeans, the Germans, and some of the Scandinavians, they kept the heart symbol, but then they changed all the rest of them to acorns and bells and leaves. Guess who won? The French. Because we still have hearts, diamonds, clubs, and spades, right? Right. And so then the shape came to the United States, and it just flew from there. And we use it on everything. And a lot of you, if you go home and look at the hearts that you've got in your home, and I thought how neat that it was that symbol. It stands for something loving and caring and positive. You know, I have a Chinese rug at home. You know what the symbol is on that? Bats. We could have had a bat, you know, as a special symbol. But the thing that a lot of Americans use when we decorate is the heart. And so I just bought a couple of things along. Most of the things that we made with hearts were very utilitarian, and we've used them every day, but just to make them a little nicer, a little more special, we put hearts on them. So you see this spoon, everyday spoon, but what's on the top? It's a heart. It's carved out of the top. It made it a little more special to use. This is just a birch bark canoe, and it's a blending of 2 cultures. Who made these? Probably Indians? For sale? Okay. The heart does not belong in a canoe, but it was made for some stupid tourist to buy and take home because American housewives would like that heart. Okay, so there's a blend. They don't go together at all, but there's that heart in the canoe. And from the turn of the century, I try to bring lots of things along when I talk so people can see samples. But this is just a pin cushion, and made the turn of the century, again, by Indian artisans out east. And what did they make it? In the shape of a heart, and that would appeal to people to buy. So there's lots of fun little information I share, and I really enjoy that. I'm working on one now on old tickings, which is old fabric, you know, that we made ticks and pillow covers from, and I'd like to do one on sheet music too, but we'll see if those get together. It's been really fun though, and I meet so many neat people, so it's a fun hobby. Adrian, do you want to show too?
Well, you can see who the talker is in the family. He does a good job of talking there a bit. I feel it might be a little bit my responsibility to be are doing this type of thing, because it stemmed really from, I think, the last cousin reunion. I was talking a bit with Paul. He was telling about some of the writing he was doing, and a book that he said, and I don't know if I said it at the time, I know I thought, I'd really like to see that book and see some of it a bit. I kind of enjoy, books are fun, but they're kind of special when you know the author and know a little bit about him that way. So I don't know if he happens to have one in his pocket tonight or not.
I got one which I appear, but I actually didn't write the book. I read a couple chapters. I stopped in Spring Lake on the way down and ran inside and grabbed the book off the shelf and put it back in the car and continued on my way to South Dakota.
Well, like to see up there a bit. But I don't do the talking. I just use a hammer and saw kind of day and night is what it amounts to. And so brought little samples of both what I do during the daytime, and the parts up here, the steel and plastic ones, are parts that orthopedic surgeons like me put in various hips and knees, and we're fixing broken hips and broken bones and that type of thing. But then I'm not so sure which one is the practice, but the other part of the time we do some of the same type of thing with wood. And so I made a few whirligigs and a variety of different things. The pins are made, and then this summer's project couldn't really bring it along because it was a little utility shed, so it bring some pictures of it, and couldn't be satisfied with just a ordinary off-the-shelf type shed. So we've had kind of fun with that. But that's kind of kept us busy.
These are two of my very special cutters, and I know these are over 100 years old, and you see what they are? Dutch shoes. I got those very early on in my career. Just had to share that.